Okay. So welcome to everyone watching this interview. Today, I am honoured to have Dani Binnington with me from Healthy Whole Me. And Dani is a wellbeing expert, a yoga teacher, and she founded something called the Superfood Super Club. Mm-hmm. And she's really passionate about supporting ladies that have had a similar journey to herself. So welcome, Dani.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Dani, I think the best place to start is if you explain to everybody a little bit about the history and your cancer history, and maybe that it was, part of your family history, and how you got through that initial stage of your treatment.
Yeah, of course. When I was first diagnosed with breast cancer, I had no idea that a few years down the line, I would start supporting others on a similar journey. And so I think everything has changed for me. From my career, I was a fashion jewelry designer. I'm now helping women all the way through treatment, all the way into their menopause and beyond. So that's really changed. But how I feel every day has changed. And yeah, I think everything's taken me by surprise. And I found a lump when I was 33.
Okay.
I took myself to the doctor. I did the right thing. And it was a triple negative breast cancer. And that was treated with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and lots of surgeries. Mm. And yeah, my anxiety was so high, and my fear of recurrence was so much that when my active treatment finished, I felt extremely low, and I felt like I was really swallowed up by this big black hole.
Yeah. And so how did you and your family, because you've got a very supportive husband, and obviously your family and friends, sort of work with you to get you through that time?
Yeah.
So anything specific they did?
I think initially we all just muddled through, and there is no better way. People often say, Dani, I've had a friend who's recently been diagnosed. Have you got any tips? How to best support, what to say, what not to say? And I think it's all so individual. I think we muddled through. We just did our absolute best with the situation we had, but we really tried to stay as active as possible. And where I, for example, couldn't book a holiday, I couldn't look into the future, I couldn't see that in 3 months' time I'd be getting on a plane and maybe on a holiday. My husband was adamant to book things in because he could see ahead. And I really dislike that sometimes about our relationship. I felt very lonely. I'm sure he felt very lonely, although we were close, but we felt very lonely in our experiences because we perceived it so differently. But when the time then came round, I always thought, oh, wow, we're here, we're doing this. Yeah. And so there was a long time where I thought post-cancer life wasn't going to be part of my life, but it did become part of my life. And I'm glad we planned a little bit for it.
Yeah. So maybe that was his coping mechanism, that he liked to plan, looking forwards and having a sort of more positive outlook, whereas you, as the person right in it, was just taking one moment at a time and couldn't see beyond that specific one moment, which is very natural. So once you got through, I don't know how long your whole treatment program was. Was it 6 months, a year, or longer?
So it was about the span of a year until I then finished with radiotherapy. And then I was moved to 1 monthly and then 3 monthly checkups. And that's really when my life began to crumble. And I was riddled with insomnia. My fear of recurrence was so high. On the one hand side, I had the Macmillan nurses in my brain constantly coming to care for me for my end of life. Like I had these scenarios, this catastrophizing in my head all the time. And I was really busy. I had 3 young children. The twins were 3 at that point when I finished treatment. My eldest daughter was 5. And so I was really busy mum. Yeah. And at the same time, my brain couldn't let go of those really, really dark thoughts. And that was the time I took to the World Wide Web at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone else was asleep. And I thought, well, food is the answer. I'm going to just eat differently. I'm going to remove all these foods from my diet. I thought that was how I could claw back control. And it replaced a little bit of this active treatment by me doing something.
Okay, because that's very interesting for me to know what you did with your nutrition, being a nutritional therapist. So were there any things that you changed about the way you were eating?
Yes, and I got a lot of things wrong, and those are the ones I want to share. One thing I got wrong is I didn't get help. There are many amazing nutritionists, dietitians, there are oncology dietitians, part of every hospital that can help. But I went solo. And so I removed 7 major food groups from my diet from one day to the next. And that was how I did it. And it became obsessive. I would have been mortified if you'd offered me a tonic water, because that contained sugar.
I was just going to ask you, was it the fear of sugar that was the big thing?
Of course, it was as well as the gluten and all wheat and anything white and anything processed and all alcohol and all caffeine and all, what have I forgotten? Anything that is ready-made.
Oh dear. So you took out quite a lot of the joy as well that we get from food.
Oh yeah. And I was cooking 3 meals at every mealtime, one for my husband, who's a really sporty guy out on his bike all the time. The 3 kids ate differently. And so it was exhausting. There's no joy. And one day my husband then went to the fish and chip shop after I'd served them courgette spaghetti. And I thought, God, something's got to change. This is clearly not working. So my family sent me on a nutrition in practice course with a really good cookery school. And that was the first time I not only clawed back control and confidence, but a little bit of balance. But one thing it has taught me is it's really taught me to cook with lots and lots of veg. And that was a real positive for me.
Yeah.
And although I didn't go about it the right way, I understand that now. It gave me a bit of control, and that control gave me hope. Because the hope was that I am doing something to support myself apart from what the doctors had done.
Yeah.
And that was a really integral mindset change that I really want to sort of underline and highlight for anyone listening. At one point, we've got to become active, and we have got to have a say and a do in our recovery. And whatever that is, it's whatever resonates, if it's the right thing for whoever is listening, we've got to do that, because our doctors are doing their bit. And then there is us and our everyday life, and what can we do?
Yeah.
And those are the things I want to share with all of the women I support now, that there is a buckets full of stuff that we can do that not only supports how we're feeling every day, but it can also improve our overall health. And in some parts reduce our risks of recurrence, because we have plenty of evidence.
Yeah.
And those are the things I want to bang on about, because they're really exciting and they give back a little bit of hope.
So if you can bang on, as you say, about some of the top things that you would suggest any of the listeners might want to integrate into their life. You've touched on nutrition, as in having sort of more of a balanced approach, and also having a joyful approach to nutrition. What else would there be for you?
We have plenty of evidence that exercise is incredibly important. And we have lots of statistics on evidence. And there are new statistics now from a wonderful company and professor, Dr. Anna Campbell, who's a researcher at a university in England. And the research goes so far to say that people have better chemotherapy outcome rates if they embark on physical activity. So they tolerate treatment better, which means they can stay on treatment and the recommended dose for as long as the doctors would love them to be, and recovery is quicker.
Okay. And is this
then we go
during the treatment, or is this post-treatment?
Yeah,
during
so this
treatment.
is during treatment already. So the latest evidence is now that also physical activity really supports you during treatment. Then it supports you during your recovery, and it can reduce your risks of a cancer recurrence by up to 35%.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's huge. And that is something that it almost needs to be prescriptive. And for anyone who's interested in knowing, not from me, but from the expert from the study, I've recorded a podcast episode with Professor Anna Campbell on the
wonderful.
Menopause and Cancer podcast. So if anyone wants to tune into her, the source, the expert, really, I'm only resharing. This is really, really exciting because it's something we can all do. And one of the most important things there is it's not so important in people are now going to think, but how much and what exactly, right? So those are the question I think our listeners are going to have. It's making a start. Something is better than nothing. And it's building up to something that is sustainable for you. So if you're 6 weeks after a double mastectomy, your program will look different than if you're maybe 3 years out. And again, there are many exercise specialists that can support. So perhaps the learning here could be, who can help me? If you're feeling
and also not excluding all forms of exercise, because even things like gardening is exercise, and dancing, any kind of dance, gentle yoga, swimming, it doesn't have to be what we think of as hard physical. It's just what your body can cope with and what you enjoy, because I think a lot of people think of exercise as something that has to be done rather than a joyful integration into life as well. And that's not just people with cancer, and we're talking the general population. So
absolutely.
So what other tips? We've got food and we've got exercise.
I feel mental health is not quite spoken enough about. And I think that jet lag, the cancer hangover, the anxiety, the trusting in your body again, those things need addressing, and sometimes we need a bit of help. And I'm really glad I always had sort of access to counselors. I tried hypnotherapy. I tried many different things to help me support through, as well as talking and being open and sharing. And I feel like often we get to the end of our active treatment and the world around us starts to congratulate us. She's done it. And people always said, wow, you're amazing. You went through all of this with your 3 little kids. But when they praised me almost, I felt the worst, because that's when my active treatment had finished. And I had so little faith that my body is going to do the right thing from then onwards. And so it's finding some support whenever. So if you're listening to this and you might be 3 or 4 or 5 years or even more on, and you're struggling, or perhaps you've got new fears, new things coming up, it's important to think it's okay to get the support whenever. And sometimes we don't know who is best. Is it a counselor? Is it a psychiatrist? It's just making a start, because whatever you do will lead you to something else or someone else. And making a start somewhere, or a charity, or a phone call to Macmillan or something like that.
There's a lot of different directions one can go to. And I think sometimes a lot of the people that haven't been in the same situation as yourself or some of the other cancer sufferers, and even those, when they finish their treatment, that's when the huge anxiety suddenly arises, because like you said, they feel that their body has to cope by themselves. So there's a massive fear and anxiety that I see in both family, friends, and clients of mine that have finished their treatment. And that just lives with them constantly, and especially in the months leading up to that check, like the yearly check, there's this buildup of tension. I can physically see it in some people, thinking, am I going to get the all clear again? Now, how would you suggest that people in a similar situations maybe manage that increased anxiety and fear? Is there a particular approach you've used yourself?
Yes. And again, I don't think I got it right always, or I knew how well stacked my toolbox can be in the early years, in the first sort of 5 years. The more I now work with experts, and especially helping women in menopause after cancer, the more sort of open my view became, and the more I can maybe help myself as well. And I think it's a really 2-pronged approach. We can do all the meditation and all the breathing and all the exercising and all the eating well. And at the same time, anxiety can take over and stop us in our tracks. And then I think it can be really helpful to draw on other things. And so some of those things could be natural solutions. So they could be natural or herbal medication. Some people call it herbal medications, other people call it supplements, but it's important to know if you're still on maybe a long-term endocrine treatment, are there any contraindications with any other medication? Because these natural remedies or medicines can be really powerful. And I always like to think I shouldn't have to worry about contraindications. If we can perhaps go to a professional, like a herbal medicalist, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
To help us support that, rather than buying a little bottle for $10.99 in your local health food store, where we don't actually know how it can really support us best.
No.
And then there are also medical treatments that I think can be really helpful. And I think one of the biggest things I wish I had access to is perhaps a late form of antidepressant in my early years after cancer, or access to beta blockers who can help me really manage my very intense anxiety around scan times. And I think one thing that went wrong for me is I wanted to be quite brave for my doctors. I wanted to show my medical team that I've got this. I often didn't talk about my symptoms and side effects enough, because I wanted my oncologist and my surgeons to think, wow, Dani's coping really well. And so they couldn't help me with some of my problems because I didn't share them. And the same was, I don't think I really ever said how poorly my mental health was and how high my anxiety was. And so I didn't have the conversation about antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. And they can be so helpful. And they don't all make you feel addicted. And they don't all need to have terrible side effects. And so I think it's having an open mind. It doesn't mean you're depressed by having access to some medication that can help you through really difficult phases. It can just maybe take the edge off. And I wonder whether many people that I speak to take the edge off with a couple of glasses of wine in the evening.
Yeah, which is actually worse with regards to reoccurrence of cancer.
And also it doesn't help with our anxiety the next day. It doesn't help us with our sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. Although it helps in perhaps the moment and falling asleep, the repercussions aren't probably worth it. And
big knock-on effect.
Yes, and so I wonder whether I always thought I needed to do this as naturally as possible, because I also thought my body has had so many chemicals and chemo and so many drugs, I didn't want more. So that was partly, and partly I didn't say exactly how poorly I was feeling. But working with so many women now, I know how helpful it can be for maybe 2 or 3 weeks around scan times, or maybe for the first 2-3 years when you're feeling, gosh, it's all just too much, to have the conversation and have a consultation with your doctor and talk through the options. That is all. You might not ever need to take it, but to know your options.
So you'd encourage then all the listeners to share all their symptoms, everything that they're feeling, and not just talk about those that might be associated with the type of cancer they had and where that cancer particularly was. So they need to go in with all their list of symptoms, everything, and then say, so how can we deal with this? You know, how can I best manage this? Is there something that you can give me to take the edge off, as you say here?
And we're also differently wired, aren't we, Christine? You know, some people dye their hair and wear nail varnish and do all sorts of things, and other people never do any of that, and they might not be so prone to taking medication. We're all so different. It needs to suit you and your path. But I feel once we've had a cancer diagnosis, our body gets quite fragmented into sections. It's the breasts get treated. But the breasts are a small part of your body, or perhaps it's your colon, or wherever your cancer was, or your lymphatic system, or your blood, or wherever your cancer was, that gets treated. And then the rest of the body gets forgotten for that time. And I always felt it's now up to me to put my body back together in a way, because my body was put back together, but in the wrong way. I felt like I woke up as a puzzle with all the wrong pieces. And so slowly over the years, I had to restack my pieces and put myself back together. And that is only possible if we address the whole body, which is the physical body, the mental body, the spiritual body. And the healing really didn't kick in if I just addressed my left boob.
That's true. So what things would you say cancer has taught you you've come through the other side, so to speak, if I may put it that way, and you've created a wonderful business as well, the way you support other people that are going through the same thing as yourself, and you've got a wonderful community, which is lovely to see. So was that something that was burning within you to do, or did it come later? How did the whole sort of business side emerge?
So I first set up an Instagram account that I called Healthy Whole Me, because I so desperately wanted to become a healthier, more wholesome, so that is the exercise, the nutrition, the mental health, me again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to bring in speakers and create workshops and wellbeing events, because I thought, wow, there's so many great experts that can teach on different things. And I thought, if I want to know what they have to say, I'm sure there's other people that want to know about gut health and positive parenting and whatever it was. So I brought speakers in, and I thought, wow, they're amazing. And then 6 years after my cancer diagnosis, I chose to undergo a risk-reducing oophorectomy. So they removed my ovaries to reduce my risks of ovarian cancer.
Okay.
Because we have a big family history of ovarian cancer and lost many people. And I carry a faulty gene that gives me much more increased risks.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose to undergo and have my ovaries removed. That was 6 years after my cancer diagnosis. And that opened up a whole new can of worms. And I realized that menopause after cancer is a totally different ballgame. And my friends were all out there starting HRT in the UK. You know, we've had a bit of a menopause revolution in the last few years. And I thought, wow, there's all these people out there, and hormone replacement therapy is surely not an option for everyone after cancer. We have a really different roadmap, perhaps, and it is possible for many cancers, but not for all. And so we need specialist consultations and very specialist advice. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a whole new sort of can of worms. And I realized how under-supported, dare I say, every single woman I spoke to who was after cancer in menopause was. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to just do what I've done for the last few years and bring in the experts. Because I'm not, but I love all the experts. And so I brought in loads of experts, and we've created a program together that really guides people in their choices. So it's partly the experts are sharing the statistics, the evidence, the treatment options. We have a little how to eat better section in there. And one thing that all our members are teaching me is that life is so uncertain after cancer, because you've been asking me what cancer taught me, is life is really, really, really uncertain, regardless how far on you are. And that niggly thing of that uncertainty will stay with us. And I think once we get the expectation right, we can breathe a little bit easier, or sit a little bit easier with it, because often we think, once I'm done with my treatment, I get my old life back. And I'm sure everyone listening now will agree with me, that's not going to happen. Life will be different, but not quite the same.
Not quite the same. So would you say that you've become a bigger risk taker than you were before?
No. And at the same time, I have taught myself to go and take risks again. And so that was a process, because and when we talk about risks, it's different things. You know, initially it was having a piece of cake that felt like a risk. So it might sound crazy to you, but it's how it was for me. And so it's different things. It's a risk could be allowing to plan for a holiday that is 6 months down the line. A risk might be very many different things to different people, but sometimes they can be exhilarating. And sometimes after we've taken even the tiniest of risks, we feel that we've achieved something. There is an accomplishment that comes with it. And I think that's the point that I'd like to share. It's not taking the risk, is what does taking a risk do to you? And there is a positivity and an accomplishment that comes with it that is really rewarding, especially if you're after cancer.
Yeah. So where can the listeners access all the lovely expert talks that you have? Because I'm sure many of them are going to be so interested in tuning into some of these talks. Yes, you've mentioned your Instagram page, but your podcasts, where can they find those?
Yeah. So the Instagram page is a bit of doodling about me and what I come across, really. I then created the Empowered Menopause program where we guide people through these 4 months. And then I thought, gosh, again, I want everyone to hear what the experts have to say. And so I've created the Menopause and Cancer podcast.
Yeah.
And initially I thought it's going to be a really small audience. And if a few people listen, that's great. But we're in the top 5% of all podcasts in the world. And it just shows to me that it's such an underserved group of women. And we're told to, we've got all the support to live better and longer and have better cancer survival rates. And that's wonderful. And now I think it's time for us to say, and can someone please help me how to live my life after cancer? And I think that survivorship with menopause is where I come in to bring the experts in. It's called the Menopause and Cancer podcast, and people can find it everywhere. And whether it's exercise or diet or mental health or trauma or cognitive behavior therapy, I always make sure that every expert is really fully trained. So my dietitian is a lady that works in a cancer institute, and she's trained in menopause. She's written several books. So those are really people that know their stuff and have lots of hands-on experience. And those are the people I feel we should tune into.
Yeah. And also, as you say, really important to know about contraindications with the different medications that a lot of cancer patients in particular, both during and after treatment, might be on, which, food, herbs, supplements can all interact with. So you just need to be made aware of those. So if I might ask you one final question, what was your go-to, so not the general population, but your go-to mood uplifter while you were going through your cancer? There must have been one thing that just lifted you up slightly and made you feel good.
So I have one during treatment, and that was walking in the woods. And I would walk up around the back of our flat where we lived, and as I stepped into the forest, I would take my wig off, because I knew there would be no one else. And I often would cry, and it was really sort of really healing. I would be in the forest and I would walk, and there was no way I could have run then, but I walked as much as I had energy, and it was the walking. And there were days where I couldn't even walk down the end of the road, but when I could, I walked. And I walked alone, and it was one foot in front of the other. And I had a mantra. So if anyone has a mantra or positive affirmation, use it. And mine was, with every day, in every way, I'm becoming healthier and stronger. And so when my mind was catastrophizing and taking me to my really dark places, I would repeat with every step and with every day and every way. And I would repeat my mantra for hours every time I walked, because I needed to keep my mind in the present as much as I could, because if I didn't, it just goes off into an illusionary future or into a dreadful moment of my past. And so that was one. And then after my treatment, it was gardening, because my stepfather said to me, gardening is like planning for a future. And I thought, I am planning for a future. I can't see it, I can't feel it, but I'm planning for a future. And to me, it was like, that phrase, when you do it, even though you don't believe it, like you can fake it until you make it. And I think with my gardening, I was definitely faking it until I started to suddenly believe a little bit that I can make it.
Yeah. And it's also lovely seeing things grow, isn't it? And develop from nothing. So so thank you so much for sharing your wonderful experiences, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I like to say, all of it, and being so honest and open with us. And I hope that all the listeners will log into both your website, which is healthywholeme.com, as well, your Instagram page, and also the Menopause and Cancer podcast. So thank you so much, Dani.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us. Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
I wish everyone who is listening all the best for the upcoming months.
Thank you.